we're already late. So if I can ask Eva to come and join us at the front, and you can go.
Thank you.
So the second part of the session is we're going to split up in discussion group. But before we do that, we're going to have a short presentation from Eva Jazevich, who is a trade union activist in Unite. Eva is also a climate activist, and that's how I know Eva. We both believe that climate and trade union should. So the question or the topic of the discussion is about the experience of organizing. So make sure you experience. How are we using education and in rebuilding unions from below? And Eva's going to talk about some of her own experience, start to give us some concrete examples, and she will explain how she works with Iraqi oil workers, paramedics in Gaza, but more recently with hotel workers in London. Where do you want to start?
Where you are.
So please give a good welcome to Eva.
We want this one to use at the very top. Okay. Do I get to use one of these things? Ooh. How do I use it?
No, I don't.
Do I press the...
Go backwards and forwards.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the one to use. Okay. Okay. Sorry for the really unimaginative title for this. This is just going to be like 10 to 15 minutes. I was asked to talk about my experiences, and I mean, I've been union organising on and off, I'll speak slowly, on and off for 10 years. Officially with Unite the Union in 2005 at the beginning of the union's organising unit, which later became the Organising and Leverage unit. But before that, I was active in various solidarity organisations, the International Solidarity Movement, which sent activists, or we volunteered actually, to go out to occupied Palestine. And I also went out to Iraq in 2003 at the beginning of the international occupation. I'm Polish. Poland was the third biggest occupying power in Iraq, responsible for 22 multinational divisional forces. Above Poland was the UK, and of course the major one was the US. So obviously I wanted to resist the occupation of Iraq in whichever way I could, but I wasn't going to do it through armed struggle, obviously. So because I believe in unions, I got to work, I got in touch with a new union, the Southern Oil Company Union as it was then, which later grew into the Iraqi Federation of Oil Unions. Now, their story is one of great hardship. Oil workers were under surveillance from the Ba'ath regime. They occupied and still occupy a really key strategic industrial position in the country. Iraq's economy is 95% dependent on oil revenue still. And as we know, one of the invasion of Iraq was to control, for Western powers and international oil companies allied to Western governments, to control Iraq's oil reserves. So these oil workers here, this is Hassan Juma, who's the leader of the union, they wanted to protect Iraq's oil sector, what they called a corporate occupation. And they weren't alone. I'll go into the kind of main issues they were facing, but they weren't alone because unions, the peace movement, were also wanting the occupation of Iraq to end, and they wanted self-determination and sovereignty for the Iraqi people. So main issues the new union were facing, military occupation. They were actually, they wanted to see the fall of the regime. They had been oppressed under the regime. This is in Basra, by the way. This is the south of Iraq, which had had it the worst, as well as the Kurdish north, under the regime. But they were under new orders, occupation orders issued by the then governor, Paul Bremer, which outlawed unions. So this was an issue. They weren't recognized. And actually, successive Iraqi governments still refused to recognize unions in the Iraqi public sector. So the Iraqi Federation of Oil Unions is still unrecognized. 15, how many years on? 13 years on. So in Iraq at this time, anyone could have a militia, a political party, or an NGO. But unions were also growing, but there were lots of competing forces for power at many different levels. Regime beneficiaries were still in place, so some of the people that were oppressing oil workers at a managerial and security level were still in power. They had been keeping the oil sector going under the sanctions regime, using their ingenuity, but they did need new reconstruction materials. Privatization, they did not know really what this meant, having worked in a public sector for decades. They wanted to know what was coming. Foreign oil companies, who are they? What are their intentions? How do you organize unions? Because unions were forbidden under the regime, or there were kind of Ba'athist yellow fake unions. And how to get international exposure and for the unions. So a group called US Labour Against War, which was made up of US trade unionists, traveled out to Iraq, and I did a delegation for them, and they had an extremely useful tool, a useful educational tool for unions, primarily in the infrastructure and oil sector, which was called the Corporate Invasion of Iraq, and it detailed which US companies and their connections to the Bush administration were coming over and what their plans were. Likewise, an organization I later worked for, Platform, did a report all about the contractual mechanisms which the oil companies were going to impose on Iraq through the oil law. The oil law, thanks to the union, thanks to also international solidarity, and in part the kind of parliamentary process which was in Iraq by the occupation, which meant that the oil law did not pass. In some ways, maybe the occupying powers would have achieved their aims if they had gone for another dictatorship, but kind of liberal interventionist political philosophy had a role in creating the failed kind of new state of Iraq. But the oil law did not pass, and it was the work of researchers and NGOs actually in translating what these contracts would mean. Production sharing agreements, they're called. I won't go into it, but you would have protests saying no PSA. And because an important industrial force was able to understand what was coming to them through the help of research, a key aim of oil workers was realized, which was to keep oil in the public sector as far as possible. So the story to share there is that there was a very strong political, cultural goal of that trade union, which was anti-occupation, anti-dictatorship, and looking to secure Iraqi oil as a national asset. So they saw themselves as much more than a union, but a kind of national defense force in a way. So, second example of some volunteer work I did, in which I tried to support or facilitate the formation of a union of medical workers in Gaza. It didn't work out very well, but we did try. So I went out with the Free Gaza movement by boat, because I'm banned, so the only way I could get in is by boat. And the Operation Cast Lead in 2008 happened, in which 16 medical rescuers were killed in 22 days of bombardment. This is actually an image from the latest massacre of last year, which was even more intense, 51 days, 8 times the ballast that was dropped during Cast Lead was dropped on Gaza. Less medical rescuers were killed, but still targeting of facilities. So what were the issues for those workers? Well, obviously, the political context. They're under a blockade. There is no international protection for them. International law is not applicable to them because no international actor will enforce it. No one has been held to account from the Israeli government for committing war crimes in Gaza. There is internal factional destabilization. Oh dear, this is the wrong slide presentation. It's okay. Factional issues and destabilization. Lack of infrastructure, it keeps getting bombed. Lack of materials and medicine because of the siege. And then your sort of classic workers' issues, low pay, no overtime, no healthcare. There's no, these paramedics are going out and saving lives, and they've got no access to healthcare. Often they don't have access to repair, the means to repair themselves after they've been injured. and extremely high risks. So we did get everyone together. There are different 5 minutes. Okay.
Just no. Can you stop on this and go on to your organising experience in the hotels there? Because it's about organising. We can talk about this at another point of the session.
Okay. So I'll speed on. The main issue, in a way, the main issue for those medical workers was stop what's happening to us, because we were going to try and get them better materials, torches, etc., sort of physical materials, but if you can't stop people being physically attacked, then there isn't that much that you can do. So, Unite the Union, that's where I went next. So, the Organising and Leverage Unit, as it later became, started to take on more and more political campaigns. So, this was one campaign to try and reinstate Frank Morris, a sacked electrician on Crossrail. So, instead of my job being workplace organising, we were all going on protests, leverage protests against every single company or investor or boss associated with the Crossrail project, which Frank was sacked from, which is the biggest public infrastructure project in Europe. Unite has also been doing a lot of political campaigning around saving the National Health Service, but the stuff that I'm most embedded in right now is organising with the Hotel Workers branch. This is an image by John Sack. It's to try and give a kind of personality to the branch. You've got a receptionist, food and beverage waiter, you've got housekeeping department at the forefront because they're the most invisible and they're the biggest department of any hotel, kitchen and maintenance. So the issues in this sector, don't forget, London is the tourism capital of the world. Millions of tourists come. We have a huge luxury hotel sector. The hotel rooms are the most expensive in Europe, and the workers are still on minimum wage, on 0 hours contracts. There's a big issue of exploitation, so being forced to clean more rooms than your allocation. You're given 16 rooms a day, but you won't go home until you've done 18 rooms. You often don't take your break in full. You take 20 minutes instead of half an hour, so there's big exhaustion. Obviously, people just leave because it's such horrific conditions, so there's an issue of it being very understaffed, so people are very overworked. Language barriers, this is a big struggle for us. I speak Polish and Arabic, but really, if we're to take on this sector, we need more organisers who can speak the languages, but we're doing that by building up activists. And yeah, hostile employers, but we have really inspiring examples of New York City, where the union Unite here has managed to win the best collective agreement for hotel workers anywhere in the world. The starting wage is $24 an hour, £16 an hour. They've won that through putting a lot of organising resources into that sector. For Unite, it's a very active branch that's been going 10 years and has great volunteers, and then 2 part-time organisers, myself and a hotel worker. And Unite here have said they had 2 organisers per hotel in New York. So, but anyway, so we've got these issues, but leverage. Let me explain to you just quickly the leverage that a hotel has. So the housekeeping department micromanaged, say 30 room attendants to the department. If they go out on strike, or if they even stop work, which has happened before because they're working through agencies, they don't get paid on time. Sometimes they've just gone up to the canteen and said, we're not working till we get our money. And panic ensues, supervisors get on their knees, beg them to go back to work. Within an hour, the money is in their account, they go back to work. But if they don't go back to work, the hotel comes to a standstill. Guests can't check in, they don't have a made bed, they don't have a clean room, they won't stay in that hotel again. The reputation of that hotel is damaged. So it's not like a factory where production can be made up. You can't make up for lost production in a hotel. So what we've been doing is we have a Facebook and a Twitter. Okay, Twitter, you cannot organize anything through Twitter, but you can amplify what you have organised and what you intend to organise through Twitter. This is important. We do need to use social media. This is a graphic novel that an ex-room attendant, Barbara Popryszka, has made that we will use as an educational and organising tool in Polish and English. It's called A Tale of Two Cities, and it shows the experience of hotel workers. And we want hotel workers to read it and to identify their experience in it and discuss it. We've been using the media as well. Now, it's a very old story that hotel workers are exploited. It is a new story that hotel workers are fighting back and ready to strike. So when this group of Polish room attendants in a luxury hotel opposite the Houses of Parliament in London threatened to go on strike over being forced to do too many rooms, having new contractual conditions imposed by the agency that took over the contract, they got together and threatened to strike. Initially, through the grievance, the agency ignored us. When this came out, they couldn't ignore us. So this got us back to the negotiating table. Oh, I'll go back. So the story here is we were lucky that we had one group of 14 workers in a housekeeping department that all spoke the same language. That's actually very rare now, and hotels deliberately choose workers from different backgrounds so that they can't communicate and organize together. We're also, as a branch, doing a campaign around tips. Unite the Union won a change in the law, and this began with 4 waiters in a room being told, great, we'll campaign with you, but you know the law says that an employer can top up the minimum wage with tips. And now that's illegal. And now there's another aspect to UK law, which is the employer can take your tips as a waiter. They can actually do that. So we're going to change that law. And what we're doing is, we're targeting Pizza Express. It's their 50th anniversary, and they charge 8% on all credit card tips. So we're going to be sending these, like menus, to activists around the country, which shows you how to have a picket outside, how to go inside the restaurant and distribute materials, give a speech, get a round of applause for the waiting staff, highlight this 8% tip tax. So we're very much using leverage in this case, because the waiting staff are unlikely to be able to do very much, but this is a public restaurant susceptible to public opinion. Another aspect of our organising has been to support this anonymous hotel worker called Made in London, who has been writing about her experiences. What's the point of this? It's to make visible the invisible work of housekeeping. This person writes really good English. You don't have people in housekeeping departments who speak or write very good English, so it's very hard to communicate the experience. But this is more targeted at the people who stay in hotels and that audience. Lots of HR people are following this person. Loads of hotel managers are following this person. My final slide, you'll be happy to know. So the tips. It is really important to use research, as has already been mentioned. So there are NGOs and academics that have been doing research and work around issues as diverse as oil privatization in Iraq or the hotel sector in London, and the activities of companies that steal tips, make millions off waiting staff's hard work. Knowing the dynamics behind laws and contracts, we can change the law. We know we can do that as trade unionists. Animate the invisible. Social media is really good at doing this. We don't have to rely on big journalists and newspapers, even though that is what they take notice of, but we can use our own media. We have been teaming up with other trade unions, the Fast Food Rights Campaign of the Bakers Union and United Voices of the World, who are organising cleaners. We have an unsectarian approach. We're working, we're supporting IWW. They've come to our protests. We'll go to their protests. We want to work in coalition. There's enough that needs to be done. It's not like and we're not organising in McDonald's. So when BFAWU and us have at McDonald's and people say, which union shall we join? We say, join the bakers, because they're organising, they're doing it. So mutual aid and solidarity. Be disruptive, take direct action when it's tactical. This is what we'll do. And be aware of the need to amplify and publicise your work and your wins. One of the reasons that lots of people are excited by the Hotel Workers branch at the moment, it's not that anything's changed that much from 10 years of organising, apart from it started with 100 members and now it's got over 1,000 members. It's because people are seeing it and it's it's getting visible in other activist and union movement networks. So that's it. Sorry if I went off to the beginning,
Well, thank you very much, Eva, for this interesting presentation. I think it's giving us lots of food for thoughts. So we're gonna now split into discussion groups, and I just repeat, what we're looking at is how we are using education and organizing in rebuilding unions from below. I think we're gonna do a new group. You're gonna do your little count. Do you want me to do your count? So we do
4 blocks. Good plan.
4 blocks.
Well done.
Block of 4 classes.
Block of 4.
Yeah, very good.